Hi, I'm Jesse, and today we're counting down 10 graphic novels that bend the genre. These are things that are experimental and interesting and have done new things with the form of comics. I just love books like this, and I love stumbling upon them and finding them. Sometimes you'll find them in a mainstream superhero comic book, something really interesting and creatively done that's never been done before. Sometimes you'll find them in an independent comic or in a graphic novel or somewhere, and we have a mix in the list. They're just really fun. They're really cool. These are all highly recommended. I hope you check them out. So let's get started. Starting off, we have a book called Home Time. This is pretty obscure. It's Australian, it's 2 volumes, and it's just excellent. And what it does that's innovative, it's the story of these 5 children that get sort of swept away into an alternate fantasy world and have to figure out how to get back. What it does that's interesting is that each chapter is told from the point of view of a different child, and each one is drawn in the style of that child. So, like, drawn in a different style that sort of matches that kid's personality. So my favorite one is a chapter that's drawn in a video game pixelated style because that character loves video games. There's one that's more painterly. There's one that's drawn as pencil. There's all these different art styles, and I think that's really, really fun. While still being a consistent style, you can tell it's the same artist, but it's just really innovative and a really creative way to do that. Next up, we have a book called Vincent. This is one of the top books I recommend just to anyone for any reason, in like one of the books you should read in your life. And what's really interesting about it is it's a biography of Vincent van Gogh, and it really focuses on the relationship between him and his brother, who supported him as a starving artist his whole life. And it's beautifully written and touching. And what's interesting about it creatively is that it uses colors from Van Gogh's palette. So the colors throughout the book, and it's very simply drawn with these bright colors, it's sort of drawn in Van Gogh's style in a way. And it uses samples different colors from the palette, from different paintings and works of Van Gogh's. It also sort of exaggerates. So when Vincent goes through different mental states and is struggling mentally with some of the challenges that he had with his mental health, you sort of see it from his point of view, and the lines and shapes get more abstract and just sort of out there and wild, and look more and more like some of the more wild parts of his paintings. And you can see what he's seeing through his mind. It's just really fascinating. It's a beautifully written book, highly recommended. Next up, we have a book called Nextwave. And this is a mainstream Marvel comic book from a couple years ago. Stuart Immonen is the artist who I love. And it's a sort of group of misfit Marvel superheroes, kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy sort of tone. Very, very funny, and just sort of meant to be comical, but also with a lot of action. And what's innovative about it creatively is one of the issues that's collected in this graphic novel has a layout of double-page spreads throughout the entire book. So this means that 2 pages are just a single image, which gives you this huge, beautiful image. And it's just this team fighting monsters and weird aliens and cyborgs and crazy things over and over and over through these pages. And it's really fun. There's a whole lot of detail drawn into all of the pages, so it doesn't feel like you're not getting your money's worth. But it is a single picture, and you're looking at it like, oh, really cool, a single picture. And then you turn the page and you're like, whoa, another one. That's crazy. And it's like that throughout the issue, and it's really, really cool and really beautifully drawn. And next we have a mainstream superhero comic, Nightwing, issues 87 and 105 specifically, although this entire run, it's recent, it's currently happening, is really, really good. But these issues are innovative in some special ways. Nightwing 87 is a single image throughout the entire comic. It runs horizontally, and you can see I laid it end to end here to see what it looks like. it shows one single image with the characters moving through it as they go. And it tells a great story. It's really beautifully drawn. You can feel the action moving forward as you're reading this single panel moving forward. It's really an interesting idea. And then issue 105 is a point of view issue where everything is drawn from Nightwing, the superhero's point of view. And that's another really cool idea. And it's interesting that these issues have experimented in different ways. And those are really neat to pick up. Next up is Cerebus. And this is pretty controversial. I read this entire series. It's quite an accomplishment of the author who independently published 300 issues of this book for decades and sort of created his masterpiece that he wanted to completely realized his single vision, and it came out as one of the longest narrative stories probably ever written. And he's very, very talented artistically and with the writing. It's controversial because about halfway through the series, he comes out with his views on a number of issues that I don't agree with and that a lot of people don't agree with. And I read a lot of the writing around it, like him explaining his views and all this stuff, and I still don't agree with it. And but I do think it's useful to expose yourself to other points of view and to not avoid reading things just because you know you're not going to agree with them. But at least the first half of the series doesn't touch on that as much and is really worth reading. It's innovative artistically and creatively in a number of ways, two of which are just in terms of the typography and fonts. I think he's one of the best letterers in the history of comics, just really creative balloons of text and different fonts and different things like that. And I also think he's one of the best caricaturists. So he has caricatures of famous people guest starring throughout the books, but also just drawing in that caricature style some of the main characters in a really exaggerated but realistic, emotional way is really creative. But definitely look up the controversy before you buy this one in case you don't want to give your money to support it. So that's up to you. Next, we have another mainstream comic. This is pretty recent. This is Flash number 776, which is collected in this graphic novel. It's just really, really fun. In it, Flash and Dr. Fate, who's this mystical superhero, are trying to escape through this dungeon, and they break the fourth wall. And Dr. Fate appeals to the reader and says, "Please help us, help us." And Flash sees the reader and can't believe it. And throughout, they make you interact with the comic, like, please turn the comic upside down so we can escape this tunnel, and blow out the candles, and put together these clues at the end. And they're directly addressing you through the fourth wall. And it's just a whole lot of fun, really creative and innovative and nicely drawn. Just a really, really neat idea. Next up is a classic, Watchmen. Hard to avoid it on this list if you're trying to think of innovative comic books. In particular, in this one, I want to focus on issue 5, which is famous for being symmetrical. The name of the chapter is Fearful Symmetry, which is from a William Blake poem. And in it, every page is mirrored by the page next to it in the book. So the two middle pages are the same, and then the next two outer pages are the same, and the next two outer pages are the same. And when I say the same, it means they're visually similar, with the same colors, with sometimes the same themes or the same characters talking, or the same concept that ties one panel to another. And the whole thing is beautifully symmetrical. And the double page spread in the center has this just gorgeously laid out image that matches the Watchmen logo in a sense. And it's really fascinating and was really pushing the genre back in 1985 and 86 when it came out. This next one is much more obscure, and it's new, relatively new in the past few years. It's called Always Never, and it's a love story. It's a romance, and it's endearing. The artwork is really charming, and it's a story told backwards. So it starts from the present day and then goes back and tells you the story of this couple and how they met and why they're together, or why they're not together, because at the beginning you realize that they're not together and you don't know why. And each scene plays forward in normal time, but the scenes go backward. And the very end mirrors the very beginning, which is always the sign of a good book anyway. And it just is like a mystery that unravels as you read it. And it's just really well structured and really well told to give you little clues, but still be this compelling narrative that isn't just confusing for the sake of it, for the sake of the gimmick. It's actually a beautiful story. So that's one of my recent favorites. And then this one's very obscure, but has long been a favorite of mine, Astray in the Woods. This one is really innovative because the author published it online as a webcomic and took suggestions from the readers, and each day drew that suggestion as the next panel of the comic. And in it's second person, so it's like a choose your own adventure, in which you are a cat, and readers would submit what they want the cat to do next, and the author would pick one, and then she would draw that and have that as the next thing that happened in the story. And you'd think that that would make a very disjointed story, but she must have picked good ones, because it is all very coherent and fulfilling and well structured by the end. And it's just a really neat, sort of haunting story as you try to figure out what's going on and what you're supposed to do. And then lastly, one of the most innovative comics, I think, ever, if you can even call it a comic, I don't know, is Chris Ware's Building Stories. And this thing is enormous. This is a box. And I haven't actually opened it since I originally read it, since I originally got it a number of years ago. So I'm going to open it again with you live as we take a look at what's inside. So there's one book here that is a comic that is very cool in his extremely detailed style. And the whole theme of this is the story of a number of ordinary characters whose lives intersect. And this box is filled with all these different pieces of paper and comics and books and scraps that piece together these lives from different perspectives. So here's another one that's sort of like a little golden book, like children's book, that has a lot of detail and interesting stuff in it. You can see the inside is even decorated to look like a golden book. There's like this pamphlet about a bee and how the bee's life is intertwined with everyone. Here's another comic pamphlet. Here's a larger comic, really interesting, beautiful, just like the lives of these suburbanites. And then this huge one, I'm going to get the box, is like a newspaper. It's like a giant-sized newspaper, and it continues the story. And you can choose what order to read them. There's not like a set structure you're supposed to follow. So it makes the story unveil itself to you slowly. Here's little scraps of papers and books. I think there's like 20 of these throughout the whole thing. And just bigger and bigger ones. And they're really interesting and creative. And of course, his art is remarkable. And then here's a huge fold out of the whole building and what's going on. This is constructed kind of like a board game base. It feels like a science fair diorama. It's enormous. But this is crazy. Like, it's just such an innovative way to use comics and to have people have this sort of experience beyond simply reading. Like, you're living the story and you're reading, but at the same time, you're having this three-dimensional experience as well, which is a lot of fun. So that's it. I hope you liked the list. Please like the video and subscribe if you're interested in seeing more, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks so much.